Hello, and welcome to this edition of the ASHA podcast. I'm Fred Wyand with the American Sexual Health Association, ASHA. In this episode, we're talking about cervical cancer and survivorship. And of course, one of our cherished programs is the National Cervical Cancer Coalition. And we're joined today by Jolene Whisler, the leader of the NCCC Central Illinois chapter in Peoria. And she has quite a story to share. Jolene, welcome. Thank you for taking time to chat with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I was honored to be asked to be on here and happy to oblige.
All right. So I really want to get your perspective and advice for those who are coping with cervical cancer and the aftermath of treatment. But first, of course, got to ask you about your story. So you're a cervical cancer survivor since 2006. And I'll let you take it from here and describe what you went through with the diagnosis and the treatment.
Okay. Well, 2006, I was experiencing some symptoms. Some things weren't going right. So I went to my OBGYN and we had a discussion. And then next thing I know, she's scheduling me for a procedure for the next morning. So I went in and had a DNC done where they scrape the lining of your uterus, and pretty simple procedure. And then the next afternoon, I received a phone call from the doctor's office and said, who took you to your procedure yesterday? I said, my mom did. Why? She said, well, why don't you call your mom and see if she can bring you up to see Dr. Ali? And I said, why? Why can't I drive myself? Like, what's going on? And I knew instantly something was wrong. So when I went back up there, as soon as I walked in, she walked in the door of the room I was in. I could tell because she just kind of had that look on her face,
Yeah.
And then she'd originally had diagnosed me with uterine cancer, is what my original diagnosis was. And so that night I had to go to the hospital. She made some arrangements for some people to stay a little longer, and we did a PET scan. So I had to drink the drinks, about an hour and a half of waiting for all that to absorb into my system. And then they made arrangements to have less than a week to have my surgery, my hysterectomy, total abdominal hysterectomy done. Less than a week later, I was in getting that done. And then once they tested the cells is when they realized it was cervical cancer and not uterine cancer. So in my situation, she said at that point, had I had a pap smear, it might not have caught it because it was up close to my uterus is where the growth was. So, but at any rate, I still should have been years before because it had been 7 years since I'd had a pap smear, and that's far too long. So, I hold myself responsible for that because I waited too long to get checked. So once I was in there for my surgery, 9 weeks later, I was in getting mapped for radiation treatments, and I received 25 external treatments and 3 internal treatments. And knock on wood, it's been all good since.
That is amazing. 28 total treatments, internal and external, plus surgery. I mean, you're a warrior. You're battle tested, so to speak. You certainly have an authentic voice. So, wow. Let me ask you, what would your advice be for someone who's, say, recently diagnosed? They're in a whirlwind. They're trying to figure this all out. They have no idea what any of this stuff is. What are the 1 or 2 things they need to know right away?
Well, I think the first thing is to always maintain a positive attitude. Don't let your mind go to any dark places because you don't know what's happening. Just like with me, when they first diagnosed me, it was with uterine. It wasn't until my surgery, less than a week later, and they tested the cells that they realized it wasn't uterine cancer. So in those moments, I could have been negative and, planning my funeral in my mind, but you just can't do that. You have to maintain a positive attitude. I always believed it was mind over matter. At least that's how I got through it. But I also ask a lot of questions. I don't think I asked enough questions. But it was a whirlwind. It seems like from August until the end of November is when I had cancer. So, when it first happened, like a couple years after, it's like, well, that time when I had cancer, because it didn't seem
Mhm.
It just happened so fast. It was like, oh, you got to do this and you got to do this. And it was one thing after the other, but then it was quiet, which was good. And life returned to normal. So I thought it was normal, but it turned out it wasn't as normal as I thought afterwards. So,
Did you jump online and start searching? Where did you get your information?
well, this was in 2006.
Right.
So, um, for me, getting online was not as easy as it was for others. I didn't have, well, did I have a computer? I don't know that I had a
I
laptop
think
at
I
all.
had dial-up back then, so yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
I had that. But no, I went off of, I did, I grabbed every pamphlet because at the time it was all brochures and pamphlets. So,
sure.
the American Cancer Society, there was a wall they had pamphlets of everything, under the sun. So I found myself grabbing some pamphlets. But then once I started reading them and seeing some of the statistics, I put those pamphlets down right away because I didn't, again, that I didn't want that to affect my, mind and my state of mind. And because I could control that. That's one thing I could control is what I thought, the thoughts that I had. And I wanted to make sure they were always positive and that I didn't jump to conclusions or didn't jump to any prognosis of myself. So that's the important thing is you have to stay positive, like you have to.
Let me ask you a bit, just continuing this about the personal side. I mean, this is just so stressful in every way you can imagine.
Yeah.
For somebody who's going through this now, how do you suggest they tap into? I mean, it takes a lot of strength, right? You really have to be strong, and if you've got to find that strength. How did you find that strength? How does somebody tap into that to get through this?
Well, for starters, I was blessed to have a wonderful support network of my friends and family that were there for me. I really did lean on my friends a lot to not talk about cancer. They knew what was going on. I had shared with them in the beginning, but to have that excuse me, have that continual conversation was not something that I needed. I need to hear what was going on in their lives because I just wanted to hear anything other than cancer. So that's how I maintain my strength is through my friends and family, but also through prayer. That's, I think, a time when your faith comes into play. And that was certainly one of those times.
You mentioned there, that's interesting. Keeping your mind off of cancer. You don't want to just have these interactions with your family, friends about you, and just the cancer. The cancer is everywhere. The cancer is all we talk about. Yeah, you need to get your head out of that space a little bit, right, and do something else.
Right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
a.
And that was,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
that was something that my friends made a point to we tried to do a lot of things, which I was the type of person, and I still am that I like to do a lot of things with my friend. So being with my friends didn't seem unnatural or not, it didn't seem like anything that we didn't already do. And for me, that was important to keep that consistency because then it didn't feel like, oh, we're just going to the movies because they feel sorry for me because I have cancer. No, that wasn't what it was. It was just that we always did. We'd always go to the movies or go out for dinner or lunch. So I tried to maintain those activities that I would always do because then that took my mind off of my journey that I was on at that point. So, but my friends and family and faith were very important to me, and that's how I was able to keep the stress at bay, but um, still be able to be active and functioning. And of course, the medical staff were phenomenal. I went to, at that point, it's called Methodist. Now it's called Unity Point at Methodist, but that's the hospital that I had, the healthcare system that I had went through for everything. And the staff was phenomenal. Every time I went in, we were joking, we were laughing, and I found a way to joke about it, if you will,
Mhm.
uh, oh, I forgot something. It must be the radiation brain, stuff like that.
Mm,
So kind of make light of those things to keep things light and
mhm.
uplifting, and laughter is so important. So trying to have fun and still trying to maintain my normal life. It was very important.
Yeah, and you know what? It makes perfect sense, sort of bringing some humor and lightening things up a little bit. I mean, my first reaction may well have been, "Oh, this is so serious." No, no, we don't want anybody to think we're making light of it. But to you, that actually sounds like it was helpful because you want those kinds of normal, everyday interactions and not
Yes.
somber and serious stuff, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was very important to do so. And not getting, not keeping yourself um, isolated, keeping my mind occupied and not isolate myself, because some people can get very depressed just from getting that diagnosis. And then they could, like, I'm single, live alone. I had a boyfriend at the time, but well, anyway, but just keeping myself active, because you don't want to isolate yourself. If you isolate yourself, it just makes everything seem that much more difficult and that much more depressing. So that's again what I said, stay in contact with your friends and family. And if you normally don't maybe go out with your friends as much, try to go out with them more. Try to do things to keep yourself active, because if you can keep yourself active and trying to have fun, then that's going to keep your mind off of the dark side, because you don't want to go to that dark side.
Sure, sure. And for people who maybe don't have a very big or robust support network, or they just don't feel like going out, these
True.
days, fortunately, there are a lot of online resources. Like NCCC has an online support community, a message board.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, and so we'll link to that in the show notes. So those are some really good tips, and yeah, so it
Hmm.
looks like there are a couple ways people can go at this. I want to
Yeah,
ask
there's
you.
so many
Sure.
more tools and resources now than in 2006.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
definitely, and the advancements of medicine. So that's really a plus as well right now.
Well, let me ask you about the medical side. So you touched on that briefly. You said you had really good experiences with your medical team at the
Hmm.
hospital. Um,
I did.
so all right, so you went through surgery and radiation. So what
Correct.
can you suggest that patients do to make that easier or cope with side effects?
I think it's important, if they're experiencing some type of side effect, to communicate that immediately with your physician, your oncologist, the nurses there where you're getting any of your oncology radiation or chemotherapy. You have to communicate that immediately. That's what I did, because it was a new ball game for me. I had no idea what I would be experiencing. So when I went through something that I didn't used to have these type of things happen, I would ask questions just to make sure that, what's going on, what's this, and I very, um, kept them very aware of any changes to my body, and or any, like, even if I had any, um, how do I put this? Any physiological changes,
Hmm.
I made sure that I shared as well. Um, there's some changes that I had went through, that I experienced, within 6 months of my radiation, which I don't know want to get too graphic, but I know that some of the foods that I ate had a different effect on me. So if I ate salad, it would go through me pretty quick, if you know what I'm talking
Sure.
about. So that was something that I needed to check to see what's going on with that. In the areas where I did with the radiation, like where they mapped me for, and the radiation did hit, I did experience like some dryness, things like that on your skin, and they would give you some aquaphor and things like that to be able to help with that. And then there was changes in another area of my life, like sexually, that
Hmm.
was very different. And so that's something that I had to talk to my doctors about as well, to make sure that you know what I have to look forward to in that area, and what I was experiencing, what we can do to maybe try to make things a little more pleasant and not have the side effects I was experiencing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And those conversations aren't always easy to have. I mean, even the doctors are not always
Right.
comfortable having these conversations. I mean, how would you say that went? Were those, I mean, it's, of course, it wasn't an easy conversation, but was it fairly smooth, or was it, were your doctors engaging with you on that?
Yeah, it was fairly smooth for me because I'm a pretty open person. So for me to ask questions that might seem normally uncomfortable for some people, I knew I was going through something, so I just put it out there. This is what I'm going through. Now I did have it helped because my gynecologist was female and my oncologist was female. That helped. I think if my physicians were male, that might have not come as easy for me. But because I did have, female doctors, that really helped because I knew they could relate. They could relate to some aspects of what, I was talking about and going through. So that was very helpful.
Right, right. And while listening to you, I was reminded NCCC actually has some videos on intimacy following cancer and cancer treatment. So we'll link to those in the show notes too. And they feature some chapter leaders really talking about their experiences. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you tonight too. I just think it's so important for patients to listen. It's one thing to listen to me or listen to a medical professional, but to actually have your voice. You went through it,
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
that and one of the things people tell us sometimes is that I felt isolated. I felt alone. I didn't know anything about cervical cancer or the human
Hmm.
papillomavirus HPV that causes almost all cases of it. I just felt like I was the only one. And that's why, and of course they're not, but that's why it's so important to get voices like yours out there so people know they're not alone.
Right.
There are mentors who have walked this path and can help them. So that's why we love to
Yeah.
have.
And that's great that they have that. That was not I didn't have, I just didn't have that type of support in 2006 that they do now. It would have been
Yeah,
so helpful to have that. And I didn't ask enough questions about what will I be experiencing, 6 months, a year, 5 years ahead. I didn't ask those questions. It was kind of I just winged it, so to speak.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
had the experiences and then thought, well, this is odd. What's this about? So, like for example, I can give you example, like right after my surgery, um, it kind of hurt to pee a little bit. I thought, what's going on? Well, I talked to a friend of mine who'd had a hysterectomy already, and she said, well, if you look on your left shoulder, there's going to be a patch. That's a hormone patch. Just rip it off. You won't have those feelings. And I thought, well, maybe I don't know if I'm supposed to, but I know it hurt when I pee. So I was like, can't take this. So I looked over, and sure enough, I was like, well, she was right. So I took that patch, I ripped it off. And then with it, I'm not advocating going against what your doctor would say. I'm just saying for me, that's what I did. And then I noticed it right away. Like I didn't have those, that discomfort when I had to pee. I didn't have
yeah,
the discomfort. So
yeah,
um and then I know, like, for I think it was 9 weeks, they said you couldn't have, any relations, like intimacies, which was good. I mean, because that was a lot. That's a lot down. That's a lot of change there. So once you know that happened, and then through the radiation, then once I did, then there was some discomfort,
mhm,
and that's something that I talked to my doctor about, and they were able to give me advice and give me, whether it's medicine or anything like that that I needed to help. They provided that then. But I think for me, what I wished I would have asked more was about down the road. What's going to happen 5 years down the road? Like what will that look like? Because when I was 34, and you don't have those hormones, that's another thing they looked at. They gave me hormones because after I told them I took the patch off,
mhm,
then they gave me hormones, and they gave me like one kind of hormone, and it had just weird effects on me. So then they put me on another one. Long story short, I was on 6 different hormones for 6 different months, and I felt like 6 different women. I just felt so entirely weird. So my gynecologist at the time said, I think right now it's best to just not put you on any hormones. Let's let you just sort of kind of get used to life and what's going on. And so, but then there was a point later that they did put me on hormones for a while. So that was right off the bat, that was where I had the problems with the hormone and regulating things. And because that, not only affected me physiologically, I mean, it affected me, physically too. So,
yeah, yeah,
and those are the questions that I didn't ask about later in life that I wished I would have.
yeah.
So yeah.
That's a good point because I have a note here to ask you. How was the interaction like with the medical team? What do you wish you had known or asked them about? And it sounds like, yeah, that makes point. I mean, that's a good point. What's going to happen
Yeah.
down the road? I see what's happening now, but what about a year from now, 5 years from now, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all.
I mean, it's important. I can't stress enough. It's important. If you have any side effects or any symptoms that you're not used to having, or if you have a reaction, even if it's your diet, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That part I did do. It's just the, in the future, what can I expect? Those are the things that I didn't ask enough of. And I was 34. I was just
Right.
trying to live life, and I didn't really think about those things then. But looking back now and after what I know now, gosh, I wish I would have been a little more inquisitive about what was to come. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's important to keep the communication, um, you know, keep good communication with not only your gynecologist, but also your oncologist and your primary care physician. It's very important.
Yeah, because you're seeing a lot of different providers. Yeah, there's a lot to
Yes.
juggle there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So you know, I'm thinking about like like family and loved ones and the spouse, like a spouse or a
Mhm,
partner, or really even somebody like your mother, or just somebody who's close.
mhm.
They're really going through this too. Um,
Yeah.
what would you offer as advice to somebody who's actually is this part of the support system? What is it they need to do beyond the things we've talked about? Is there anything else particularly they can do to really help that patient get through it? Something like do their grocery runs or do their laundry or do errands or whatever. What can they do to help the patient?
I think just being accessible, even if the person just needs to talk. For me, I was just talking to a friend of mine about this today. Right after the day after my surgery, I was up walking, and I set goals for myself. Even the 4 days I was in the hospital, I set goals for myself. I told myself I was going to walk 3 times a day. So I had a little route that I'd walk out in the hallway, down to this big window, around the nurse's station, and back to my room. I did that 3 times a day. And in the beginning, and then if I could, and then I ended up doing more and more. And the nurses were just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're up walking." Well, because I wanted to get myself used to the pain that I was going to experience, but I needed to get up and walk. You have to walk. It's very important to exercise and to
Mhm.
walk, to get used to walking. They said I wasn't going to drive for 2 weeks, and I thought, I'm an independent woman. I'm not going to go 2 weeks and not
Right.
drive, and I'm not having people haul me all over the place. So I actually was able to drive a week after my surgery because I was so like determined to get up and walk and exercise. So that's what I did. So
Yeah.
it's important to do those things.
Yeah, and you touched on something there, independence. I guess at least for the short term, there is a certain degree of a loss of independence, and that's stressful. And I hadn't thought about
Yes.
that. Yeah, you have to depend on others, I guess, for a lot of things maybe that you normally
Yeah.
wouldn't. So I can see why you really wanted to get back in the game. And I like
Yeah.
that tip about getting up and walking and exercising. I mean, I mean that's just a good thing to do in general for our well-being and our
Right.
mental health, and I can see why it's especially important to get your strength back. And
Well,
yeah,
yeah. And you have to think about that my age. I was 34 at the time. So I was used to be bopping around, and I wasn't married, didn't have any children. So I was just a very active person. Did things with my friends, was just active in helping other family members or friends with whatever they needed. So I did not want this. That's another thing. I was not going to let cancer disrupt my life because I had things to do.
right.
So that's kind of why I was that way. But now when you're talking about somebody, if I was like even a decade older or even 5 years older than I was, it still was important for me to stay active and do not isolate yourself. It's very important not to do that. But like if you have somebody, that might be 40s or mid 40s, um, you know, it's kind of at a different point in life, I think, in that respect, where I think that maybe, I mean, hopefully you're active and do things, but if you're not, then in this particular case, when you're dealing with the after effects of the surgery and then going through the radiation, it is important to, if you're not active, to try to get active. It's just going to help you feel better, not only physically, but mentally, um, spiritually. It just makes you feel better. So that's what I was really proud of myself that I just kept going because I wasn't gonna let it get me down.
And is that part of the motivation for why you became a chapter leader within NCCC?
Well, that's an interesting story. When I experienced like all of my treatment, and the medical staff was so good and so wonderful to me, and I thought I've got to, what can I do to help others? Well, if I can give back, let's do that. So I did some volunteer work with the American Cancer Society. I know when we had the Relay for Life, I was asked to give the fight back speech, so I did 2 fight back speeches. And then I was even asked by the NCC to do a talk about my experiences in front of the Illinois State Health Commission, and that was in 2007. So like it wasn't even a year, maybe 6 months or so afterwards. And that was an experience because I was able to get in front of all of the, some of this, not all of them, but some of the senators and representatives for the state of Illinois and talk about my experience, because that's when they were thinking about passing the bill. I can't remember the name of the bill now, but they were wanting to make Gardasil be one of the inoculation that kids get first part of school.
Right.
And so that's what I went and did, a talk about what I went through. Because had I had that, those Gardasil vaccinations, I might not have had cervical cancer. I mean, you just never know. So if I knew if I had a daughter and I knew, whether if they're sexually active, probably figure in this day and age they are, I would want to make sure that my daughter had what she needed to have to be safe out there. And so that's why I did that speech. So it's kind of different things happened at different points in my life that kept me um, in a position to be able to be an advocate for cervical cancer awareness. And that was important to me.
Yeah, I've heard other people say that too. They really feel like part of their healing almost is just getting involved to see if they can help others, exactly like like you described there, and that makes perfect sense. And I like the fact you mentioned the vaccine. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, because
Mm,
of that, we have incredible prevention tools. We've just got to make sure that we use them. That the people who
yeah.
need them the most have access to them. And even if a young person is not sexually active, it's still a great time for them to get the vaccine so that protection is in
Hmm.
place when they do become sexually active. And we know too that
Yeah.
when the vaccine is given at a younger age, even as young as 9, the immune
Mm,
response is more robust even compared to giving it at 16 or 17. So getting those vaccines early, that sets them up with the protection they need down the road. So thank you for bringing that up.
mhm.
And then also we have screening tests. Back when you were
Oh, yeah.
diagnosed, it was pretty much a pap, but now we have HPV DNA tests that actually detect
Oh, yeah.
genetic material, of the virus that can be used alone
Yeah.
or in combination with a pap test. And it's just a matter of getting the word out, and make sure everybody knows about these tools and that they have access to them. So there you go.
Exactly.
There you go. All right.
Yeah. With getting involved with NCCC in terms of being a chapter leader, this is just a recent thing. It just happened within the last, I'd say, 6 months. Well, yeah, something like that. 6 months. A year. No, 6 months. A year ago, I started a new job where I was a community health worker and a certified applications counselor. So I was able to go out into the community and work with folks in the community and help plan events. And we had, with my position, we had um, different, I guess you could say, goals that we wanted to focus on. And I noticed one of them was cervical cancer. And it's really weird because I was asked to go to this meeting one day um, to introduce me as being new with the company that I was with, and I did. And then I said, well, I'm a cervical cancer survivor, and there's a bunch of nurses in this group. It was for the Illinois Breast and Cervical Cancer Program,
Mhm.
which they have. If you can't afford to get pap smearing screenings, you can go to your local health department,
Right.
fill out some paperwork, and then they'll give you like a voucher. And then if you are found to have cancer after you've had your test, then are able to get a medical card to help you with your surgeries and things like that. So I thought it was a great program. So I partnered up with the health department in Tazewell County, Illinois, where I live, and I said, well, let's do an event. January is Cervical Cancer Awareness Month. So I came up with some ideas, and they loved it. So let's see, it's shortly after Christmas. Let's see if we can light up the 4 counties that particular program served. See if we can light up, and if anything, the kids are going to say, what's all this light about? And then they'll be able to associate the color of teal with cervical cancer. I mean, just like everybody knows breast cancer is pink and kids learn as they get in school, but
Right.
what about cervical cancer? They don't get that same, I don't think they get that same attention. Um, so I wanted to be able to see if we could do something similar to that. We have a bridge here in Peoria, Illinois. It's called the Murray Baker Bridge. And they redid the bridge. And when they did, they put the capability lights on there. So I said, hey, let's light this bridge up. So my company actually had a grant that they hadn't used it entirely. So they were able to pay for that bridge to be lit up for 5 days. And
Mm.
then we were going to do like a health fair on a certain day, but then with the COVID uptick last January in this area, there was a big uptick in January, so we kind of had to cancel the event. But we were there to light the bridge up, and I called, the news and said, "Hey, this is what we're doing. We're going to light the bridge up. Here's why. Can you get me on one of the morning shows just to say this is what we're going to do? If you have any teal lights or ribbons or whatever, just put it out. Let people see the color teal." So then the night that we lit the bridge up was like 2 weeks later. Then they were there when we saw them flip the switch on the bridge and it light up teal. It was absolutely beautiful. So um, then I had, because of this event and planning all that, I was able to get in touch with the National Cervical Cancer Coalition after so many years of really not talking, had been in contact with them. And they said, well, we'd like to help you if you need any resources, marketing material, we'll help you with that. But they put the picture of that bridge up on their website, and that was pretty cool. So that's how I got back in touch with them. And Rena, one of the gals that works there, asked me if I would be a chapter leader in this area. And I said, well, sure. So we've
That's
already been
great.
able to raise some money for the chapter, and planning on doing the same thing again in January, is lighting it up. Reveal the Teal is the event,
Reveal the till. Yeah,
illuminating
January.
Central Illinois.
Yeah, January is a big month for us. It's Cervical Health Awareness Month. And
Yeah.
yeah, I remember that bridge. I actually put some of those images on our Facebook page and through Twitter. I'll put that.
Oh,
But yeah, yeah, I remember that.
that's a small world.
Yeah, yeah. So I will. I'll put those. I'll see if I can get one of those images and maybe put on the episode page for this podcast. That would be pretty cool. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That makes a big impact. I mean, that literally talking about getting. Yeah, you can't help but notice that I didn't get to talking about it because you literally had that bridge bathed in teal. I mean, it was gorgeous.
Yeah, it was really cool. And what's interesting is I had, through my Facebook, I had a nurse reach out to me and say, are you the one that was responsible for, are you the Jolene that I saw on the news? And I wrote like, yeah, why? And she's like, the doctors are ecstatic. So over at OSF, we have OSF and Unity Point in the area, and of course Illinois Cancer Care. But the doctors, I guess, were elated, and that was really helpful tool for them to use in terms of helping their current patients understand that, look,
Yeah,
there's some attention that it's being, that we're able to get. So there's resources out there for you. So they were able to kind of utilize that event and that experience to help their patients. And then also, what really tugged at my heartstrings was, I know at least 2 women that lived over in Bloomington Normal. That's an hour away. They drove an hour over here just to have their picture taken by the bridge. And they had
mm,
recently been diagnosed with cervical cancer. So for them, that was a very meaningful experience.
sure. Yeah, and that gets back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago. A lot of times people feel isolated, like I'm the only one I know who's gone through this, and that really
Yeah.
sends a strong message. You are absolutely not alone. Um,
Yeah.
that's brilliant. Yeah. Well, I can't wait until January to see what you're doing again for 2023. Um,
Yeah.
Jolene,
Hopefully we'll get things lit up some more, and then
yes,
hopefully we'll actually be able to have that health fair event that we were going to have that got
sure.
canceled. So I mean, I'm not, I there is some other things I have up my sleeve, but I won't give that away just yet. But there are
Right.
a few things that we'll be doing in addition to the bridge this year. So
All right. Well, we will leave it with that tease. That's great. So everybody keep checking back. We'll keep rolling out more resources, and you'll get to see what Jolene is going to be up to for January. So stay tuned. Jolene Whisler, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us this evening. We really appreciate this.
Thank you. I'm a chatty Cathy, so I hope I answered all of your questions.
You did. Thank you. And as I learned so much from the guests, who of course brought up several things that I should have mentioned, but I didn't. So thank you for covering for me. I appreciate that.
Oh, no, that's okay. And I hope that anybody out there who is going through cervical cancer, ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Stay in close contact with your physicians and let them know anytime you experience anything that's not what you normally would experience. And for those who are survivors, sometimes it's hard to get involved in advocacy because it does bring back your experience, and it might not be as pleasant. It can be painful, but being an advocate can help so many other people, and it can help just let people know, and a reminder of how important it is to get your cancer screenings, to get your pap tests, and get tested. It's so important to do that because it can save a life. If I wouldn't have went, I was literally 6 months away from being inoperable when I went to get my DNC done when I went to the doctor. So had I not gotten that done, I wouldn't be here today. So time is of the essence.
There you
For
go.
sure.
Jolene, thank you again. I really appreciate this. I know the listeners will as well. And thank you, intrepid
Thank you.
listeners, for tuning into this conversation. We will include all the resources for coping in the show notes, just all the things we talked about there, including a picture of that gorgeous bridge that Jolene illuminated so wonderfully for January. So keep checking back with us. We'll roll out new resources frequently. Also, send us feedback, including any ideas you might have for future podcast episodes. It is info@ashasexualhealth.org, and that email will be in the show notes too. Until next time, take care, everybody.